All right, how's it going, ladies and gentlemen of IB History of the Americas 1? We are back here to talk about the colonial era within the Americas, and today we're going to be focusing on a region that we have not necessarily used yet to compare in nature for this class, that is talking about Canada. So over the duration of the next couple segments in which we do talk about Canada and in terms of colonialism in the Americas, we're going to specifically begin with French exploration within the region, and eventually it's going to take us to the War of 1812. But before we get to any of that, I think we need to address a couple of things when it comes to Canada. Most people, when it comes to identifying what's happening in Canada, what Canada's history is, and who the people are, typically have these typical stereotypes that are attributed with the region. I kind of want to just take an understanding of identifying what those stereotypes are and really either moving away from them or trying to debunk some of these myths that people have about Canada. So to start today, we're going to begin by identifying these stereotypes that society typically holds, especially in the United States, from a United States kind of Eurocentric perspective. And then we're going to move into the actual meat and potatoes of French exploration. But before we get to that, I want to remind you, you have an essential question for this unit. Actually, two of them. One, how did European colonization affect the indigenous populations of the Americas? And two, how did colonial institutions form and what led to resistance towards these de facto governments? I'll give you a second to write that down. How did European colonization affect the indigenous populations of the Americas? And how did colonial institutions form and what led to resistance towards these de facto governments? And remember, as we're going through these essential questions, because this course is comparative in nature, now that we've talked about English colonization in North America, specifically what we know today to be the United States, and we've also talked about Spain and Latin and South Americas, keep in mind of the information that I'm giving you as in terms of comparing what we're seeing happen in Canada to what we already know in the other regions. So let's start off today by trying to understand from our maybe stereotypical perspective of Americans attempting to...
Is Canadian a language?
I dated a girl from Montreal for a year and a half. I love Canada.
All right, I've been there twice.
What is the capital of Canada?
I only know like 3 cities in Canada, so I'm gonna just say them. Montreal. What's the other one?
Canada's capital. Ontario is a whole place.
The capital of Canada.
Let's go with Toronto, where my Blue Jays at.
It's either Toronto, Quebec, or there's something with Victoria in it.
Ottawa's a city?
Who is the president of Canada?
I don't think I've ever heard of the president of Canada.
Poutine.
But I bet he's bald. Or like a stern lady.
They don't have a president, they got a prime minister, right?
They got all that French influence. Once you get Europe in your system, all you're gonna do is have prime ministers.
Stephen Harper.
Stephen Hopper.
Harper.
Harper. Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper.
I was told that there wasn't going to be math in this.
100 million people.
Under 1 million people.
30 million?
I feel like nobody lives there. I feel like I've visited and seen 30 people.
They're a tenth the size of America.
Canada's pretty big, but just because it's pretty big doesn't mean that it has people everywhere, because it's kind of cold. Drake doesn't even live there, so that says a lot.
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling, that's the one I knew. That's the one that I should have remembered because he's like perfect. Bear?
What lives in Canada? A whale?
Badger. It's gotta be a bee.
A bear. No, a moose. Bear moose.
Beaver. Yeah, I knew it was a bee and it was a mammal.
It's a red maple leaf. No, it's a white maple leaf on red, or is it a red maple leaf on white? Oh, I think I'm thinking of Japan. I do care about Canada. I'm from Wisconsin, although I'm very proud that Wisconsin doesn't touch Canada. People think Wisconsin does touch Canada, but Minnesota's our little shield, and Michigan's our little hat. So please don't put this.
All right, so having viewed that BuzzFeed video, yes, it is a kind of a neat intro to the region that we're talking about, but it is my hope that at some point throughout this unit, at some point throughout this class, that you guys come to a conclusion that you know more about Canada than simply maybe some of those people from that video, at very least. But in terms of understanding its complex and diverse culture and rich history that it has, I'd hope that you take away much more than that. So while that introduction is kind of neat and cute and funny, I would like us to really push ourselves to break out of this Eurocentric, or I guess United States-centric understanding of what Canada is, who their people are, and what their history is, and really know more about this region so that we can become more globally aware citizens as we move forward. So when we're talking about the peopling of Canada, the migration of people into this region, we begin with the First Nations. And the First Nations are the native peoples of Canada. And they started peopling this region of the world about 12,000 years ago, in terms of coming across from what used to be a land bridge that kind of bridged the gap between the Siberia and North America. That is no longer there, but the migration flowed from Siberia through Beringia into North America and eventually down into the modern day United States and Latin America. And there were 12 tribes that made up the First Nations, and it is said that this is how the peopling of the rest of the continent actually happened as well. And one of these tribes, the Inuit tribes, were one of the First Nation tribes, and they still live in Canada today. And as late as 1999, Canada's government actually gave the Inuit territory to them that we know it today. That is the region of Northeast Canada. Talking about early Europeans coming into this region of the world, the first explorers known to settle Canada from Europe were the Norse invaders from the Scandinavian peninsula and region in approximately the year 1000 CE, standing for Common Era. They built a town on the northeast coast of Canada and established a trading relationship with the Inuit tribes, and these Norse deserted the settlement for unknown reasons, but Europeans would not return to Canada until almost 500 years later, into the kind of time period that we've been talking about with English settlement in the North American region. New France is generally a term associated with this region in Canada around the year 1600s. It is to the French settlers a history of an unfulfilled dream. The process in migrating to this region of the world for French explorers was represented by inconsistent support from the king. There was struggles to grow population, just as the English had in colonies such as Virginia. And as early as 1534, Jacques Cartier leads the first French exploration of the region, and 1608, we see that Samuel de Champlain established what is known as the Quebec settlement, which was symbolic of the first permanent European settlement, trading post and embassy that was established there. But Champlain wanted more than that. He pushed for settlement, he pushed for growth within the region. To kind of understand who Jacques Cartier was, the French explorer that named Canada, let's watch this short, brief video from the History Channel.
French mariner and explorer Jacques Cartier led 3 expeditions into what is now Canada and claimed much of these lands for France. He is also the man who named Canada, inspired by the Huron-Iroquois word for settlement, Kanata.
Jacques Cartier and his explorations of present-day Canada led eventually to the colonization by France.
He was the one who laid the original claim for France in North America.
Cartier was born in 1491 in Saint-Malo, Brittany, France. In 1534, Francis I of France commissioned Cartier to explore the northern lands of the Americas, to search for gold, spices, and the long-sought northeast route to Asia.
Jacques Cartier's first expedition sailed with 2 ships to the St. Lawrence Seaway. He coasted around Newfoundland into the St. Lawrence Seaway, where ultimately he encountered a Native American village and he kidnapped 2 young Indians, the sons of the chief, and brought them back to France.
Back in France, Cartier's stories of fertile lands, mineral wealth, and Chief Donnacona's captive sons impressed Francis I enough, so he immediately funded a second, larger expedition back to North America.
When Cartier returns in 1535, he comes back with Donnacona's 2 sons. They sail up the river now known as the St. Lawrence River, and they first come to a place called Stadacona, the site of modern-day Quebec. They go farther upriver till they find a place called Hochelaga, which is the site of what is now known as Montreal.
Upon Cartier's return from this voyage, Francis I was determined to colonize the lands that Cartier described to him. Cartier set out as an advance party, expecting Sieur de Roberval, a member of the court, to follow shortly thereafter.
Cartier returns to St. Lawrence, reaches Stadacona, leaves a small contingent behind who would found the French city of Quebec, and then takes a group of men into the wilderness looking for the gold that he heard existed in Saguenay. That search ends up fruitless, and Cartier decides he is tired of waiting for Roberval, and he decides he's going to sail back to France.
Cartier, as far as we know, spends the rest of his life in Saint-Malo as we would say today, a technical advisor on navigation. Cartier does not return to the New World.
Jacques Cartier died on September 1st, 1551, in his manor in Limoilou near Saint-Malo.
Jacques Cartier is known for making 3 voyages, none of which found the Northwest Passage to the East Asia, none of which found any great wealth, but which enabled the French to make a legitimate claim in the contest with other Europeans for land.
All right, so now that we have a bit more of an understanding of exploration and how European settlers and colonizers crossed the Atlantic to get to this region of the world, let's look at what this world looked like with the influx of French colonialists in the region. So this is a map showing main Indian groups that came into contact with the French in the Great Lakes region. This is modern-day Michigan, Ohio, kind of area as we know it today, but you have tribes such as the Iroquois, the Algonquins, the Shawnees, the Winnebagos, and the Ottawans here around these Great Lakes, as well as others. This is a map showing main Indian groups in contact with the French in the St. Lawrence Valley. The following map is showing the imperial context in North America. As we know, we kind of talked about this a bit, that you had the charter colonies that were established along the East Coast here, and that those charters actually extended deep into the central portion of the North American region. So this is going to become this kind of crosshatched area is going to become an area of contestation between not only the English and the native populations, but also the native populations, English and French all together. And you can kind of see that also echoing up here as well, circa around 1763 and the Treaty of Paris. To talk about the Treaty of Paris, this was a treaty that gave Britain control of all lands east of the Mississippi River, except for 2 islands off the coast of Newfoundland. And the British forced Nova Scotia's French-speaking people to leave, in which the Nova Scotia's French went to another French colony that was Louisiana. And the descendants, these were descendants of the descendants of these people are typically referred to as Cajuns throughout the last maybe 2 or 3 centuries. And where I want to leave off today is giving you guys an opportunity to understand a colonial comparison between colonies in North America, colonies in Latin America, and also Canadian colonies in terms of geography, government and economy, and religious views and society. So what I want you to do before you stop, as you press stop on this video, is to write down some understandings of this matrix that you see here. It will be incredibly insightful in terms of us and our comparing these regions in nature, and to make sure you have a clear understanding of the differences between these regions before we move on.